Okay, sorry for the delay. I'm going to start, I guess, with a little bit of an origin story. Like, why in the world do I actually go through all the work to do these private tours instead of just going to like a rock jumper website or another website and just, sending a check or sending a wire?
Tanya.
Because I'm Tanya, but I mean, I have done that. But I started birding actually not all that long ago. I started in 2019, and I think Naveen mentioned I've done a lot of travel before that, and I've been to places like Papua New Guinea and Borneo fairly early in the internet days, and people just couldn't piece together all of my interests, and that's why I started doing it myself. So I would find a local tour guide, I would find a local small company and really connect with them to do something tailored and custom to really meet all my needs. But for birding, I started birding here in spring 2019, and I'll give a shout out to Debbie Beer. She was the leader of one of my early walks, and it was fantastic. I was hooked. I was completely shocked. I grew up in Philadelphia that there were more birds here besides robins and sparrows, honestly, and pigeons. I thought I would get excited if I honestly noticed a cardinal or a blue jay. And so to realize that there were hundreds of other species was just blew my mind. Um, but I already had a trip planned that fall, and I wanted to see birds in other places. As I do, I start chatting people up and said, tell me about the places you've been. Tell me where you've gone birding. I would love to hear about those experiences. And I started to hear the names of, a handful of companies repeated to me over and over again. Went to those websites and thought to myself, this doesn't quite hit, do it for me. And if for a variety of reasons. And so I asked myself, I wonder if I can apply my same kind of trip planning tactics to the bird world. Maybe yes, maybe no, I don't know, but I'm gonna try. So that was the initial thought process to kind of get me started. Now, of course, I'm struggling to go page down on this to the next page, like what the heck?
Go like right
I
arrow.
see behind,
Go like right arrow.
I don't even see a mouse.
Enter.
You lost the green rectangle around that too.
What?
So I don't think you're sharing what you want to share.
It might
When
be
you
in
were,
the
when you were said everything was good, there was a green rectangle around the screen,
Okay.
which
Okay.
is often how screen
So,
sharings
can
will
someone-
tell you what they're sharing.
Can someone in the chat, I guess, tell us whether the sharing is still working or not?
Yeah, that's still working. It's still
Okay.
yeah.
Okay.
It is, yes.
Thank you. Okay. Yeah.
Hey.
Okay, yay. Sorry for my technical limitation. So when I started looking at the major company websites, some of the things like itineraries wouldn't work for me because they might be at the time of year when I had lots of family commitments, or they might be too long. Just couldn't, do a trip that was going to be 18 days or 24 days. Like there were lots of reasons why the itineraries didn't work for me. Also, and this may really not resonate with a lot of birders, I still have cultural interests. So there might be a UNESCO site or two that I wanted to see while I was in country, and that was rarely incorporated into any of the itineraries I saw. So again, like the itineraries were maybe 80% of the way there, but not really perfect for me. The other thing, I guess, was group size and group mix. So sometimes you would look at like the maximum size on a trip, or I would look and see that maybe there'd be a max of 10. And just me personally going on a trip with 9 other people, I thought, oh, people will talk. Will it be noise? Like, just what will the dynamic be? And what will the skill level be? And the first organized trip I went on with a major provider, the first conversation I had at the airport with another person was to the effect that they were not a birder. They, in fact, had never been birding and had never used binoculars. And they were only there because their friend had paid for them. And so inside, I'm losing my mind and very worried about what was going to happen on this trip. It had some impact. It didn't make the trip terrible, but those were the kind of things that were running through my head. Like if I book private, then I know who's with me. I know what the skill level is. I know the personalities, right? I know we'll be quiet on the trails, things like that. And then, and I'm going to be perfectly honest with this next one, this box price. I had sticker shock for some of the trips that I saw. I thought to myself, well, I've been to Thailand. It's pretty inexpensive, the lodging, the food. Why is this tour so expensive? So I thought, I bet I can do better on my own. And then this last piece is if I have heard a couple horror stories where people said, I booked a trip and it got canceled because the minimum number wasn't met. So like you gotten your hopes up, you were all excited, tickets, visas, and then it got canceled. So I thought, okay, I can avoid all of those problems if I do it myself. But when I mentioned to other people I was interested in doing it, I think a couple of people thought, that's a little crazy, right? I don't know why you would do it. And some of their concerns were, I don't really have experience booking trips like that myself. I don't speak the local language. Will the guide be any good? How about the quality of the lodging? I mean, just so many things. Can I wire money and really expect someone to show up? I don't know the counterparty. I just lots of fears that people had, and what will happen if you run into a problem. And I think I know what I found is that through doing proper research, you can really eliminate those issues. Like you can, to the extent, I can't guarantee, I wouldn't say, oh, I'm going to personally guarantee you everybody's going to be a great guide. But if you do your homework and get recommendations from multiple sources, and I'll get into a little bit more about the process, then none of these things should be an issue. But and as far as kind of language and some of these things, I think you learn that very quickly in the communication that you have with the guy. So some of the big reasons why I do it, I mean, I already mentioned it, the trips are tailored. I get to go when I want, how long I want. I can set priorities around target birds and target mammals. I can say, hey, can we please go see one UNESCO site? Just any of the things that I want them to consider, or even degree of difficulty. I once, so traveled with a person and they had just had a recent injury. So I was like, is there any way we can, not do incredibly difficult trails? So you can take all those things, so you can make special requests and get the exact itinerary you want. And so even when you ask for birds and mammals that might seem absolutely crazy, like on this slide on the left is a bare-necked umbrella bird, which on eBird there are 1,700 observations, but I wanted to see it in Panama where there had only been 70. They still took the assignment and we still got the bird, right? So you can ask for something specific, it may be a little crazy, or even something mundane, like I really wanted to see a glistening green tanager, right? Which isn't necessarily a hard bird to get, but it was important for me to see. So you can tell your guide and they'll prioritize that. And on the right is a mammal I asked for. I got a lot of pushback on this one. I said I wanted to see an Indian pangolin when I went to Sri Lanka, which was in the fall. And the owner of the company just thought, that's a really hard animal to see. I'm like, I get it, but if I don't ask for it, we won't even look for it, right? I was like, so even though it's highly unlikely, let's keep it in the plan. And, we went out, took 2 nights, but we found one. So I don't, if you go on a prepackaged trip, something like that's never gonna, it's not gonna be incorporated in the plan. And if you, I guess, got super, super lucky, you might run into one when you're doing something nocturnal, but I don't know anybody else who has. So, you know, the ability to tailor an itinerary down to what you specifically want is one of the things that jazzes me the most about doing tours this way. The other thing, I'm not saying I'm fickle, is that you have the ability to revise the itinerary. So you're locked and loaded. You agreed to every detail of the trip. And then, I don't know, maybe I look at Instagram and I see a picture of a bird and I'm like, oh my God, I need to see this bird. Can I see it on my itinerary? So I go down a rabbit hole. Or a friend mentioned a bird. So actually, I'm going to mention Debbie again. I remember her saying oil bird to me, and I did not have it incorporated into my itinerary. And I thought, oh my goodness, can we see one? I reached out to the company owner, and actually Barb Bassett is on a tour with him right now in Ecuador. She's with Nelson, and I said, can we see oil bird? It wasn't in the plan, so we added a day. Everybody in the group agreed to it, so we got to go and see the oil bird. And on the same trip, actually, we made a revision in the midst of the trip to change the morning slightly so that we could see the long wattled umbrella bird. Sorry, it's a horrible picture, but those are the two birds. And on the left, no, I did not add or eliminate the Taj Mahal. That's just like a placeholder for cultural things. But I actually, on a recent trip, eliminated a UNESCO site. I was like, I've already seen 5 of 8 in Sri Lanka. I'm good. Let's take this half day in bird instead. And again, you have that flexibility to make the revisions up to the start of the trip and even during the midst of the trip. And obviously you're going to think about what are the trade-offs. Like, by making this revision, will I lose other important birds? And if I feel comfortable, then you can move forward with it. So just love having that ability to make those revisions. There are other cases, when the flexibility is really valued, you get to make second attempts on birds. So on the left are harpy eagles, a male and a female. The first time I went for the harpy eagle, I dipped. It was a long, hard day, and I didn't get the bird. And then the next morning, we got a call from a different village saying we've got a pair that are in the nest building. And I thought, oh, that's probably a sure bet. It might be hard to get to, but that's okay. And we could change what we were doing that morning and immediately go off and see it. And I will tell you, there's another provider in Panama that each attempt for harpy eagle is $800. And so it would have been $1,600 if I'd done it twice. In this case, my guide just felt bad. And honestly, I didn't pay anything extra. It showed up in the tip from my end, but he didn't charge me anything extra and just made me think through the fact that I was going to lose lifers that morning by going again. And I was like, that's okay, because this is the most important part of the trip for me. So again, if you're with a large group, if you're with something, that has a set itinerary that's planned for a group that isn't a group of your friends, you don't get to make changes like that in the midst of it. Again, the other two are just examples, again, where I took a second attempt, the pied thrush and the Indian pangolin. The other, and you'll find this with the major providers, but you really get to, I think in the research process, get to sanity check, how strong is their local expertise in an area. So if I take a place like Panama, or if I take a place like Colombia, when I hired guides, it wouldn't be one guide for the entire country, right? I had someone specific that I hired for the Darien province and someone different in Western Panama, because those were people who lived in those areas, birded there all the time, led groups there all the time. And I, was highly confident that they knew the areas and had a network that would feed them intelligence all the time that would increase the likelihood of me getting all of the critical targets. So these are just some birds where I can think it was super clear, you know, that their intelligence led directly to me getting really good views of these species, like that striped owl. You know, I was in the Darien province and the guy was like, we're gonna go down this road. And I was like, how did you ever find this place, right? But, you know, he had that intelligence, he lived in that area. On the bottom left, that's a rail. I want to say, I keep wanting to say striped rail, but that is not the right name. A spotted rail, thank you, spotted rail in the Dominican Republic. And my guide knew we're gonna go to this rice field, and then we're going to a specific part in the rice field, and that's where we're gonna, and there were so many. And it just, you know, again, just blew me away. But that local intelligence, that local expertise really helps. It really pays off. You know, and I'm not gonna tell you a story about every bird on the screen, but, you know, once you find these guys, they're able to really, honestly make all those bird dreams come true. Yes, Manny?
Are these all your photos?
Yes. So whether they're good or bad,
The Taj Mahal
it was my photo.
that's bad.
Yeah, they're all my photos. I thought about asking other people for permission so that I could give you better photos, but I thought, what the heck, I'll just use them. The local expertise also pays off on the animal side. So on bird tours, there are some, obviously, when people go to like Kenya, Tanzania, some countries, mammals are very much so highlighted and incorporated into the itinerary. But in a lot of locations, it's not very, very significant. So in some instances, I might ask for a few, and these are just some instances where they, you know, again, that local expertise really helped me to get the birds.
They took you to see a needle?
Oh, okay. Linda asked if they took me to see a needle. No. That actually was a daytime photo of, I had a porcupine needle in my hand. So I had seen an Indian, I think it's Indian crested porcupine. We going out at night. And then the next day I found a needle, which yes, I was gonna try to sneak back into the US, but I left it in the darn van. So I never even made the attempt, which I probably shouldn't have done anyway, but I was definitely going to try.
Saved by the bell.
I mean, I carried that thing. I had it with me for like, okay, for like 10, you know, for like 8 days. And on the very last transfer, I left it somewhere. I was like, no. Anyway,
Can you name everything on this?
sure. That's a humpback whale. It was breaching. It is a brown-throated, upper middle brown-throated three-toed sloth. Upper right is a Sri Lankan leopard. And that's a screenshot from a very bad video. And then in the bottom middle is a Sri Lankan green pit viper. And again, that's a crested porcupine. So, yes, yes. I don't know if people want me to go back and tell y'all the birds from the prior page, but if anyone asks, I know what they are. So I'm not gonna spend a lot of time here, but because picking locations is just personal. There's some locations you may have always wanted to visit. There's some group of birds that you'd like to see. But for me personally, one of the most important metrics is bird density. So when I start the planning process, like where the heck do I want to go? And bird density simply means the number of birds reported on eBird divided by square miles. I'm trying to understand like how, you know, literally what the bird density is like. Am I gonna have to travel a great distance to see a great number? Because I think a lot of people, for example, really want to go to Colombia. Well, the density isn't great. It's a big country. There are tons of birds, but I think given the size of the country, you have to make multiple trips to see a lot of birds. But there are other places, I'm just gonna like Ecuador, where you can stay in a fairly small geographical area and get, you know, 500 birds. 500 species. And so that metric matters to me because I started birding pretty late in life and still want to see 5,000 species in my lifetime. So going to these places with bird density matters to me. Bucket list items, so tiger, Taj Mahal, things like that. Instagram, my imagination gets captured by photos all the time, and I start adding places to my list, or add on to existing trips and things like that. And in terms of timing, migration, weather, things like that.
What do you mean by add on to an existing trip?
So I actually have friends that don't bird, and so I might agree to go on a birthday trip, and I still will try to figure out, can I squeeze in a day or two of dedicated birding? So I'm looking at Tom in the room, and he did a fabulous trip to the Dominican Republic, and they got all of the endemics, but I had literally like one dedicated day. I hired a person, I got as much as I could, and so that's all. So as opposed to it being a true birding trip. Mm-hmm. Then after I selected the location, the next thing that I do is really create a guide short list, right? And I think there are several ways to do it, and I try to confirm that a guide is exceptional through multiple sources, right? I do not want just one recommendation. I think it's just too risky, it's too much riding on one trip. I reach out to my personal network. There are a few people in the area that actually hire a lot of private guides or just know a lot of guides around the world. And in that case, for both Panama and India, I found guides through my network. In other cases, you can look to, who does the large tour operator hire, right? I mean, they're probably pretty good. So I know with Sri Lanka, I looked at one company that was one person that was hired by field guides. Unfortunately, our trips overlapped, so he wasn't available, and he happened to be a lot of money. And so, I took him off the list, but that's a group of people I'll look at. Also, I've gotten recommendation from guys that are good. So if I've, been boots on the ground with you, I think you're exceptional. And I'm like, well, if you were going to Peru, if it's a nearby country, like who would you use? And so I've had recommendations that way as well. A lot of the recommendations come from Facebook groups, and reliable ones. So there's a Facebook group called Birding Travel, and all people are doing in there is recommending, tour guides that they've used, recommending locations, the best time of year to go. So people go in and post questions. So I'll search on the country name and see what posts and comments relate to, Sri Lanka, since that was a trip I planned recently. And I immediately came up with like 4 or 5 people that were recommended very strongly. And so you see, and for the most part, you see positive posts, but I want to dig underneath that, because one person can say, walk with Jith was great, but what does great mean to you, right? I need to know more. So I often, if a trip report hasn't been provided, I will ask a person, hey, do you have an eBird trip report that you can share with me? Because then I can actually see the species that you saw. And if they don't have one personally, then maybe the tour company has some examples that they can provide you. But I will DM people, dig in, ask follow-up questions, because I want to get comfortable about what good meant, right? Did you like where you stayed? How good was their English? How good was your guys' English? How was the pace hectic? I just asked a lot of follow-up questions. But between the post, the DM that I have with people recommended the guides and trip reports, I get pretty comfortable. World of Girl Birders is another Facebook group that I have gone to get recommendations for tour guides. And then the last place on Facebook is that there's some expat communities. So I was in a South American expat community, and some members have interest in birding and would also say, oh, I use Francisco Trancosa in the Santa Marta Mountains. He's exceptional. So you just go through, just do some basic searches, you can get information that way. The other thing I look for is who are the top eBirders in the country. So, you know, I would like to believe that any guide I hire is one using eBird. I'm hopeful, right? Or I'll convert you if you're not. And then, and so I want to look at what your rank is for the current year, and then what your maybe what the all-time rank is. So in that case, I look at so Nelson is a top eBirder in Ecuador, and so I get that additional data point. Like I can see he's out there actively birding. I can see what his species count is. I can even look at his most recent checklist, like how complete are they? You know. So anyway, it's just another source of data to determine that this person is going to be a strong guide. And then the final one is that you can get recommendations from people that you follow. And I'm thinking about, there are some photographers that I follow on Instagram, and over time, maybe we've communicated with each other on different locations, and I value their opinion. So like the person I found for the Dominican Republic came from that source. But again, you know, if I think about Nelson that I hired in Ecuador, he was recommended through my personal network. He was recommended in 2 Facebook groups, and he was a top eBirder, right? And I absolutely had multiple trip reports to show what he delivered when he'd taken other people out. So that's how I create my short list. But if you're short on time, there are other places to look. So like if it's an add-on to a trip and you only have a day, I might look at like TripAdvisor or Airbnb to see if there are any birding options, and even are there local birding groups or local natural history groups. I found like birding buddies that way, and that have been really helpful. Next, then I developed the itinerary. I don't know, I do it multiple ways. Yes, I do borrow itineraries from some of the large providers. I look at what do they do? Is there, and then what would I tweak about it, right? You know, is there an area of the country I want to go to that they didn't visit? You know, is there a bird that's really important to me? That's, you know, usually what gets me off course. You know, was the pace intense? Because sometimes I can reach out and find a person and they might say, oh my God, we never slept. Every day we were up at 5 and we went out at night. And if I don't want that pace, like I might make some changes to the itinerary. Another place to get some inspiration is, I mean, there are lots of places, but on YouTube, you have Rock Jumper has these dream destination videos. I don't know if you've ever seen them, but they're really great sources of information to figure out some of the target birds, target areas, and habitats. I read trip reports. Also, and obviously I get a proposal from the vendor themselves, right? I'll say, hey, it's the first time I'm coming to the country. I want to see as many birds as I can. I want, you know, and I may share, I want to see owls and antpedas, and I can leave it that general if it really is like a high level trip. But like in a place like Panama, where I've been multiple times, I'll say, I want to see the bare-necked umbrella bird, like, and I can get really laser focused on something. I'll also do INAT search. I think that's why I realized there were injured penguins in Sri Lanka. And then even though there might have been 20 sightings, I was like, it's possible. It's possible. So I'm gonna ask. And you know, other things like I'll look at Instagram hashtags, things like that. But there are definitely some podcasts. There are other videos, other shows on YouTube, like the Birder Show, that might give you intel on Colombia or some other places. And then I'm assuming here, because I'm not really a podcast person, that you can also find information about these destinations that might impact your itinerary through, you know, through that. And honestly, I also don't follow too many blogs, but I know there are things like Budget Birders that might give you some insight. to help you shape your itinerary. Once that's fully cooked, I can then select, I'm not watching my time here. I'll select the guide. So I've got this short list. I've reached out to 3 or 4. So I send out a preliminary request to them with, basically what I'm interested in doing. And, one of the first things that will get you cut off the list is, did it take you forever to respond to me? Like if it takes too long to get back to me, then I already have concerns. I'm looking at the quality of the communication too. If, poor grammar or bad spelling, like if just from a language standpoint, but I do also try to actually have a call on WhatsApp because I don't want to just see the written word. I want to actually talk to you if I can, just to get a sense for, I can set my expectations about what the communication is going to be like. And if it was really poor, then that person may be eliminated. The other thing that I'm taking into account is, if I mentioned something was really important to me and you didn't reflect it in what you proposed, you're out. Like, I mean, I might try to reconfirm it and then they still ignore it, then they're not going to be a person who's going to really try to deliver for me what I wanted. It's kind of what their plan was. And the only reason for a tailored itinerary is to get what you want. So, and then price. Again, I'm thinking about the region and what I think the cost should be. I don't, the quotes I got for like a 14-day itinerary in Sri Lanka were wildly different. I mean, I just couldn't believe it. I would say the top end quote was, it was more than double which, and I'm like, that's a lot of money. And is the experience going to be that much better? Is it really worth it? I concluded no, and didn't hire them. And then obviously availability. So, kind of taking the recommendations I got into account, and this information, then I make my final decision and then ultimately hire the guide. Now, these are just, I'm sure no one cares really, but this is some of the guides that I ended up working with. When I pulled these pictures, I realized that I was like, wow, I don't think I took photos of each and every guide. Why don't I have one? It could be all about the birds, right? Get very focused. But like bottom right was just like a birding buddy that I ended up finding through World of Rural Birders, but was like essential to me in California because at the time, I was like, I will never hire a guide in the US. That doesn't make any sense to me. I've changed my mind. But at that time, that was my thought process. So Birding Buddy helped me do, much better than I would have on my own in California. The upper left, I was with an Audubon group. So like that was free. Doesn't get better than free. And then the other shots are me with guides in different countries. So it does not have to only be someone you pay for. I'm not gonna go through this, but this is just, I tried to remember each and every person that I had worked with. Maybe I actually don't have any bad stories. I don't have anyone that I would say they were like awful because maybe because I do my homework, maybe because I'm a little lucky, I don't know, but those are the people that I've worked with at this point. I may have forgotten someone, but they've all been really good. And I said, as I mentioned earlier, try to get really specific about, where it makes sense to hire people that are specialists in specific areas. One thing I definitely haven't explored yet and isn't a part of this, but I do think would be a part of my future planning is going to a lodge. I know like you can go to Costa Rica, go stay at a lodge and use the guides that they have on site. So I think that's another way to, control costs, and still have a really bird-rich experience. And then the final thing, because I, wouldn't say to you like everything is going perfectly, even though I'm pretty pleased with the amount of birds that I've seen. And some of those solutions were non-traditional. Actually, I'll go up. So for example, that first person in Tunisia, that was literally just because it was an add-on to an existing trip, is not a professional bird guide. They're just an avid birder. I did pay him. He is an engineering professor. So I've gone a little off the beaten path to find people in places where there aren't a lot of guides available. But it's paid off. He was incredible. I definitely bird with him again anytime. Some of the things that I have learned while doing this, again, I've only been birding since spring 2019, right? So, but I'm learning as I go. I would say first thing is build enough time, build enough lead time in for planning. I mean, I know that may seem like a no-brainer, but you can try to find somebody last minute, but that may limit the quality of who's available, quite frankly. But some markets, there aren't a lot of guides available, right? So you want to really reach out early. In some cases, like the best guides can be booked well in advance. With Nelson, for example, I remember he was just like, I've got these 2 weeks, like, and if not, then it'll be the following year. And I was like, okay, put me down for those weeks. And so, so building in lead time is pretty critical for, a pretty critical portion of the planning process. Be really clear. I guess the second thing is be really clear about any kind of special needs, any considerations that you have. Again, I think about the trip where someone had an injury and we really needed to let them know that, like, do not put us on like the world's most treacherous trails because, it's just not going to work for us on this trip. And for the most part, that was accommodated. And then this may not be important to anyone, but it's certainly something I probably need to say to myself is know your own limitations. I need to bring trekking poles. I'm clumsy. I don't care what they say. They may say the trails are not slippery. There are no rocks. I don't care what they say. Bring trekking poles. I need them. I didn't have them in Sri Lanka. And yeah, there was an owl and I fell. So as I do, so I need to bring them. The other thing I would say is really important, you don't have to be pushy about it, is reconfirm your priorities at the outset of the actual trip. And it could just be, at that first meal or in that first drive, just like, oh, I'm so excited about seeing owls. I'm so like, I can't wait to see the ampetas, whatever it is, whatever you're jazzed about, just to make sure it is, it's top of mind and that you get everything out of the trip that you want. Something else that went really well on a trip is we did a pre-trip meeting because a lot of the people going didn't know each other. So just thought, we got a range of personalities, a range of ages. Let's kind of all meet and get to know a little bit about each other. That will help us, just gel better from the beginning of the trip, which proved pretty helpful. Like one person was a very, very serious photographer and like no one else was. And so it's like, hey, you're young and fit, just take your time, but then catch up with us because we're not going to bird like that. We're not going to stand and look at a bird for an hour and a half to get the perfect picture. No, nobody else is doing that. And so since we could set that tone before the trip, I think it went more smoothly. And then I would just offer up that, check the lodging in the itinerary. Some people are super picky about where they stay. And I think you can adjust it up or down, right? You may say, I want to be in places fancier than that. And if it's available, right? Which sometimes there are no other choices close to your target birds, they may be able to take it up a notch. Or you may say, I want to save money. Can we stay someplace? I've actually never made that request. Hey, let's take it down a notch. No, not normally, but I think if people really wanted to save money, that would be something you could throw out there and say, hey, I want to stay in places that are more affordable if there's some available. the next thing, I think this is super important so that you get the behaviors that you want, really give feedback and praise along the way. It sounds so simple, but like I love the way my guide in Sri Lanka communicated with me. Every night I knew the plan for the next day. It was just super clear. If the plan needed to change because of something, he would let me know. Like I always knew what the next step was. There are other times where I'm like, things are shrouded in mystery. I can think of, I had missed a bird and my guide was sitting in the front of the car, and it just looked like he was like looking on his phone, and I am furious, right? Like, because the trip is ending and I'm like, he does not care that I missed this critical bird. He is looking at is he checking Instagram? Like, I'm honestly, I'm in the vehicle, like losing it in my head. And what he was actually doing was trying to find another spot on the river to get the bird. This is torrent duck.
Of course it was.
And so I didn't know he was actually looking. So I'm sitting there like, is he kidding me right now? Right. But he was actually doing something for my benefit and we got the bird. But I didn't know that. Like I was in the dark. I'm like, losing, which, I know things happen in nature. You're not going to get every bird. But in this moment, the other person on the tour had seen the bird and I had not. So that may have made me unravel just a little bit more. But again, it was in my head. I wasn't like rude to the guy or anything like that. But I think when people do things that you really like, give positive reinforcement. And if something needs to change because it's kind of yucking your yum, making something, you don't want the rest of your trip to be bad. So you should just speak up like, hey, this isn't really working for me. Think about the differences in culture, be polite, like prep for the conversation, but definitely have it so that you get out of it what you want. As opposed, like I said, as opposed to having a bad trip, which to me just isn't an option. It's okay to make change requests. I mean, I think be reasonable. You're not going to say, oh, take me to the northwest corner of the country and you're in the southeast. I don't mean things like that, but we were in an area and it's like, well, we'd rather see long wattled umbrella bird instead of what our agenda is. That's a reasonable request. And sometimes there might be incremental costs, but I think it's okay to make those. And then the last thing here, I'm saying it's okay to be greedy. And oh no,
Yeah, be careful with that.
I was like, oh no. I was like, it's okay to be greedy. And what I mean by that, you can be like ahead of pace. Like, you got your endemic targets and, you got 35 you want, and you're already at 32, you're on like day 4. And it's like, well, heck, there must be some other things that I can see. So each night, I might look and say, oh, well, that looks like a really interesting target. So I might start introducing other things that I want to see because it looks like a slam dunk that we're going to get what the other priorities already were. And so just, kind of, you can add on more. Again, you can reflect it in the tip that they did an exceptional job, but I just, I wouldn't want to go into coast mode and see less. So like, why not ask for more? So I think those are really the key things. And then this isn't on the page, but obviously if they did an outstanding job, tip well. So Indian Pangolin, I think I gave double the target tip. Like I was giving guidance for the trip. Well, he got me all the endemics, plus I had migratory targets. Plus I had like these, I wanted to see a loris in addition to the pangolin. We got the loris too, like, yeah, so he deserved a great tip. So it's just something to keep in mind. I think those are the basic lessons learned. And, in terms of lodging, if there are no better options, I think there are things that you can do to deal with that. I certainly bring flip-flops so we can talk about that kind of stuff offline. Yeah, so that is basically how I plan trips with private guides.
I will take questions.
Tanya, what you described sounds like a huge amount of time, effort, and organization, so you must be super efficient. About how much lead time, how soon before a trip, you start doing all this, and about how much time do you put into it?
Put into it, okay,
Yeah, like your trip to India, Sri Lanka, and Qatar,
right.
about how much time and when did you start?
So India was with a big company, right? So that was different. So I really had to plan Sri Lanka and Qatar. That was honestly last minute because I think it was August that I said, I'm flying really far. I should go other places. And so I added on Sri Lanka and then immediately started reaching out to people. So in that case, I only had 2 months of lead time, which I was worried was going to impact the quality of the guides. But in that case, it was 2 months of lead time. And I think in terms of time dedicated, it doesn't take much to kind of figure out what you want to see. Because like the most important is like, well, I want to see all the endemic, right? And then it was the migrants that took a little work. So I don't know. It's a few hours of research. It didn't seem intense because I can look at other itineraries and trip reports and start to look at the birds that I wanted to see. Like somehow I noticed the pied thrush and the cashmere flycatcher. Like some birds started to pop up and I was like, oh, those are really great birds. I want to see those too. So what takes the most time for me is actually studying the birds before I go. Because I try to know, what the males and females look like, and in some extent what the birds sound like before I go. Especially if it's only going to be me plus the guide and not like a group of people. I want to be useful so that we can help find as many birds as possible. I know that's not like a specific answer, but I would normally start 6 to 12 months out, and not only because I want the best guide available, not because it's going to take me that much time. I am organized, but I clearly change my mind. I start adding things as time goes by.
I'm gonna do a question on Zoom, Marty, and then I'll get to you.
Okay.
Judy?
We can't hear you.
Unmute, Judy.
All right, thank you very much, Tanya. Great talk. And I'm just a little bit confused because now you talk about arranging with the guides by
Yes.
yourself, arranging for the guides, but then you talked about being on trips with others. And
Yeah. So
you
all
know,
of
like
these
others in the car and a group of people. So how do you set this up for like a group of people or?
So I've done it both ways. I've done it when it is just me solo, but I've also planned trips for small groups of friends. Like if we have a mutual interest in the destination, then I'll plan it for a small group. But
Okay.
the work isn't radically different, whether it's for you or with a small group. I mean, you just have to take more opinions into account in terms of what birds are important. But like for Ecuador, we all got a line that oil bird was important. We all got a line that long-bottled umbrella bird was important. And honestly, I know this is gonna sound terrible. I don't know why Andy and Cock-a-Doodle just doesn't capture my imagination. Now, once I actually saw the bird and heard the bird, I was like, oh my God, I was so wrong. But when we were planning it, I mean, I wasn't going to cut it out because there were so many other good birds to get, but I was like, okay. But in the end, I mean, it obviously was going to stay in the itinerary. So it's just more opinions.
Okay. And then for the lodging, like if you're planning, say, something solo with yourself and the guide or just with a group, do you research the lodging or does the tour guide recommend lodging?
Oh, no, I absolutely am not. I'm not doing the initial research. What I'm saying about lodging, they in many cases have a set of like lodges and hotels that they typically do business with. And they'll put it in the itinerary where we plan to stay. I'll look them up because I want to know, like what am I getting into, right? Does it look nice and new? And so there are things I want to take into account. So if I think a place doesn't look great. Again, I may, I'm always gonna carry flip-flops with me for showering purposes, because if a shower doesn't look great, I need them with me. But I have another, like a sleep thing that I carry with if I think the place really isn't gonna have great bidding and there's no other choice. But yeah, I look at the lodging because I want to know if I want to ask for an upgrade. So I'm not doing the initial research. It's more to inform whether I need to make a change request.
All right, Marty?
What's your source? This is like a basic question, but I wouldn't really know the answer. What's your source for figuring out what the endemics are and all that kind of stuff? How you pick your list?
So
Like, does like Merlin tell you this is endemic or probably not?
no, I do a Google search.
Can you repeat the question, please?
Oh, the question was, how do I figure out what the endemic birds are? And there's really two ways that I get that answer. One, I'll do like a Google search, Sri Lanka endemic birds, right? That's one way. The challenge there is that a lot of the answers will be from like a British perspective, and they call birds different names. So, but then I'll also look at like trip reports from providers, and they'll say, oh, like our goal is to get all the endemics, and they may list them. So I just kind of married. Wikipedia actually has a list of the Sri Lankan endemics, but yeah.
And do a question from Zoom. Lois asks, what is the average you pay bird guides? How do you know what is reasonable to pay? Do they provide transportation?
Okay. So wait, that's a lot of questions.
Yeah, that's
So-
the first question is, what is the average you pay bird guides?
So there's no answer for that, right? Because I think the fee that is paid is going to be different, probably by country, also by how prominent the bird guide is. I think there are a couple of things that might change what the cost is per day. Also, like if I've been a repeat customer, like, Jason better charge me good prices, right? And it might not be what's listed. So I think that's highly variable. But the way I kind of do a little detective work is I might go look and see, okay, what's Rock Jumper charging, what's Field Guides charging, right? And then so I might look at a couple of the big provider pricing, and then I will reach out to some local guides, and I'll see what the range is, right? And then start to make sense of it. And in some cases, like if I've been to the country before, but before I was a birder, I already have a sense about the fixed costs. Like I said, the food and the lodging. Like I don't understand why Thailand bird trips cost what they do. I don't. I can't get my head around it. And so so it varies. It varies widely. So there isn't a standard answer for that. What was the
So I think you answered the second question too, which is how do you know what is reasonable to pay? I think you did. Last question was, do they provide transportation?
always, right? So I have never rented a car in another country just because I just don't want to. And I barely like driving here, so I can't imagine doing it somewhere else. So they do always provide transportation. Some of the roads are super tricky. And now I have traveled to get to a guide, but once we actually enter into the itinerary itself, yes, they provide the transportation.
Thank you. Any questions from the room?
Tori.
Thanks, Tanya. Have you ever experienced decision paralysis when considering the trade-offs of different options, and what have you done?
Not really, because, if so for example, with the Harpy Eagle, and he's just like, hey, we have a second shot, and we have literally started, and I mean, super productive area. And I thought, I'm probably giving up 20 lifers, right? And I was like, we're out. It took me no time. I was like, let's go. I was like, we don't have to talk about this, let's go. And in that case, it was just me on the trip. So that was pretty easy. So if I'm really fired up about, it just isn't, my gut answers pretty quickly for me. Yeah, yeah.
How many local guides do you look at when you're comparing guides, just roughly in general?
Yeah, I would say I try to start with like 3 to 5 because I don't want an overwhelming number. It's just too many. And also because I really want to make sure that their name has surfaced from multiple sources. It usually isn't a super big list either, right? That's just to protect myself.
To a Zoom question, Greg says,
Yeah.
as a woman, what would you suggest are important considerations regarding safety?
That's a great question. So, I mean, some of this stuff probably goes for Philly too. I think about the country safety itself. So I'll look to see if there's a State Department warning, any warnings relevant to women. So, I recently went to India, but I did go with a big company. And, rape was kind of mentioned as an issue in the country. So you just be mindful, stay with the group. You're not out walking by yourself, which, you're too tired anyway to be at night to be wandering off. Also, though it may not be legal, I have a retractable like metal stick that I tend to have in my backpack with me. So if I need it, it's there. And I also have a door jam thing. I'd have to kind of show you the device, but if I'm in a place and I'm like, this place might be a little sketchy, this is maybe not 5-star. I stick it under the door and you can't open it from the outside. So that's just something that would just give me peace of mind and allow me to sleep. So those are, the basic things. I'm from Philly, I can fight, but but and I watch out for myself. And I don't know, Qatar was country number 42. So I've been to a lot of places and, with different risks and thankfully nothing, well, I've only had one bad thing happen to me and it had nothing to do with being a woman. So. Yes. All right.
But can we go to Doug?
Oh, I'm sorry, Doug, I didn't see you.
Could you say a little bit more about Qatar? Because I can't imagine anything about what birding is like there.
Yeah, so with Qatar, it was kind of a whim. I was like, I'm going far, I'm traveling, I'm transferring through there twice. Why not? Right? I'm gonna stay a couple places. And I had been to places that might culturally be the Middle East, but not physically have been in the Middle East. So I decided to stay for 6 nights. And I looked at the top hotspots in the country and I stayed at a hotel right by Al Wakra Beach. And that's the number 3 hotspot in the country. So I was like, have my scope with me and I'll get things like Terek sandpiper or whatever, Socotra cormorant, things like that. So I looked at the, what had been reported at that time of year and had a sense for the kind of birds that I could get just staying at my hotel. And then because I didn't want to rent a car, I thought I need to find a friend, right? I need to find someone that I can convince to take me out or find a birding group. So the Qatar Natural History Group seemed to occasionally do bird outings. And so I reached out to them and the president actually took me to the top hotspot in the country. It was just wonderful, provided food and drink and snacks and we birded. And so I got some lifers. I didn't get a great deal of birds there, but it was really only hindered by the fact that I didn't drive. If I drove, there were some other places, there were some mangroves and things like that I would have gone to as well. And there were some good mammals that I didn't realize until I got home and I'm like, oh, I would have gone after them. Yeah.
Get the Bastard. Isn't there like an Abari Bastard in Qatar?
I don't know.
Oh, okay.
That is not something that was on my
No.
radar. And I know I had just missed a migration of nightjars that passed through. I was like, but I got some nice birds.
Sorry.
So tipping is always like, I
Mm.
never understand tipping. I mean, how do you figure out what to tip? Is it a percent? Is it? I mean, other than the fact that you may add because it was such a great
Right.
game, that kind of thing, but on a general basis, you figure out.
So people have, like in the birding travel group, people have mentioned like tipping $10 to $15 a day is like a normal thing, right?
And that's anywhere in the world. kind of?
So then you start to think through that, like, does that make sense everywhere? But with Sri Lanka, for example, the company owner was not the person who was going to be my guide. And he has suggested that I tip $150 to $200 if I was pleased with it, with my experience. Well, I was very pleased, so I increased that amount. So in some case, especially if the owner isn't going to be your guide, they'll probably recommend, give you some sort of recommendation, or you can ask for one. And then like in India, I talked to other members of the group. Here's what I'm thinking. Is that kind of in sync with what you want to give? And that's it. That's kind of what I've given is 10 to 15. But if I'm doing like a 1 day, or like 2 days, something really short, I would probably, I've given as much as, I don't know, maybe like 20%. I've done that. Yeah. Depends on what the cost was and how good they were.
Let's circle back to you. Let me do a quick zoom. Sorry. Actually, I'm going to read a comment first. Debbie says, I've heard more like 40 to 50 a day. 10 to 20 per day seems low for a skill guide to spend a full day with a client.
So I think, so Debbie, my reaction to that is, I think that maybe that's it on trips where there's a Western guide and a local guide. I have never heard anyone say 40 to 50 ever. Maybe I can go back into birding travel group and see if that's like the current recommendation. But I can tell you for my Sri Lanka tour, I was specifically said, told 150 to 200, and I doubled that. So I knew I was giving a good tip. Yeah.
Hiring a guide on a budget.
Yeah.
Do you have any like recommendations for how to find a guide on a budget? I hired a guide from Costa Rica and I feel like I can never go unguided, but they're kind of expensive.
So I think that if I wanted to hire a guide on a budget, I would think about the destination, because I think that the per day cost is cheaper in some places versus others. And that would help me. And also I would think about flights and lodging, right? Some places are just a lot cheaper, so it might be expensive. I keep saying Thailand, and I've not planned this yet, but I'm going to plan it. And the flight might not be expensive, but lodging is going to be very inexpensive, relatively speaking. And I'm going to go out on a limb and say that if I find a guide, that they'll be relatively inexpensive compared to other places, but not through a big company. So I would just be careful about the place I chose, but I'm happy to talk to you about it if you want help trying to plan something. Yeah.
I'm going to do one on Zoom now. Ritz asks, regarding lodging, are financial and booking arrangements typically with guide or lodge?
So every tour I booked, it's been through the guide, right? So could they be making some sort of skim off of the booking? Sure. But yeah, I've always done it through the guide. I've not done it direct. It's something I think I would do it, and I think Costa Rica is a perfect place, but like Ecuador has a lot of Brazil, Peru, Brazil, lots of places have lodges and where you could go direct. I just haven't done it that way.
Any questions in the room? I think there are more questions on Zoom. Judy asks, how do you decide if it is safe to go out by yourself?
I mean, before I go somewhere, like I said, a few things. One, I am going to look at what the State Department is saying about the country and specific areas in the country, right? To get a feel before I go. Also, before I go to a place, I'm gonna start to incorporate that into my news feed, right? Because I want to know what's happening right now. So right before I went to Ecuador last year, a presidential candidate was murdered. And one of the people on our trip came close to backing out. So I'm gonna be looking at the local news, but also when I get to a place, and I mean, I don't wanna be like, oh, I'm from Philly, but I'm from Philadelphia. I lived in New York City for almost a decade, and I've, kind of lived and worked in Hong Kong, like in other big cities. So I think I can go to a place and kind of size up what's going on, and I know whether I'm willing to go out or not, right? And then in some cases, I might just ask somebody else on the tour, like, hey, you come with me, right? If I think, it's a little dicey, but in general, I think I just personally size up the situation myself, in addition to like the news and the intel from the State Department.
One last question on Zoom and I'm gonna end it there. Debbie asks, do you worry that a local guide doesn't have insurance in case of an accident on the trip?
So that is not a worry for me. I have asked questions like that, right? I have, so when I'm going back and forth, it's especially if I think there's, really terrible roads or something like that, then, I would ask questions like that, like what kind of coverage do you have? Thankfully, I don't know, on a birding tour, I've never been in an accident. I got in an accident in Colombia near El Peñol, but they did have insurance. Yeah.
All right, thank you so much. That was. A lot of thank you to the people on the show as well.
Thank you for putting up with me.
Thank you, everybody. Have a good night.
You're like interesting goals. I mean, I think you use eBird a lot, right? Again, you look through eBird and everything, right?